Tonight, I'm sitting in for John Moore as host of this show. Now, John is always insistent that we start right on time. So even though I tend to have a somewhat looser relationship to time, I will keep to his tradition and get us started right now on time. So good evening and welcome to the ZWAC Show of the Northern California Recycling Association. ZWAC, of course, refers to Zero Waste Advocacy Committee. I'm Susan Kinsella, Executive Director of the Recycling Archives. We're in the process of recording lots of fabulous interviews with the people who pioneered much of the U.S. and international recycling system over the past 50 plus years. And on each ZWAC show, I usually read excerpts from one of those interviews. Our esteemed host usually is John Moore, but tonight the reading I'm going to do later in the show is actually from his interview. So John felt a little bit awkward both hosting the show and also being featured in tonight's archive section, so he asked me to sit in as host to him, which I'm glad to do. Tonight's topic is about exploring an important part of zero waste advocacy, the legal tools that underlie effective advocacy. Or in other words, how can a law school education help further zero waste advocacy? John will be interviewing two leading zero waste advocates. The first is Sumona Majumdar, formerly the General Counsel for Earth Island Institute and today the CEO of that organization. And then he'll also interview Lori Mendez, Counsel to Save the Albatross Coalition in Southern California. So to start us off, I have a couple questions I'd like to ask John. So first of all, John, how do you approach a challenging zero waste problem differently from maybe how a non-lawyer would approach it?
Well, that's a good question because we want to talk about what law brings added value to zero waste. So for me, I think of the musical Evita and the song "The Art of the Possible," and that's what I try to bring to it: the art of the possible. You know, there's no legislature currently with power to do so that's going to ban plastics. It's just not going to happen. But you might be able to persuade a legislature to ban a specific kind of bad plastic product, like, for example, plastic bags in grocery stores, or microplastics in toothpaste, or anything that has a PFAR in it. So I try to bring that perspective. If you have a board of supervisors in a county that wants to build an incinerator and the vote is 7-0, you're not going to change their mind, but you can nibble around the edges. It might be that that board has forgotten to comply with CEQA, a tactic that I've been able to use before. Or you might decide to use the citizen suit provisions of the California Constitution and overturn the legislature's decision. So I try to bring up, how do we nibble around the edges to get a good result that might not be the perfect result, but will set us on the path to a better result, is how I look at it.
Hey, cool. Nibbling around the edges, huh?
Nibbling around. Oh, and one other thing to mention is nibbling around the edges has another benefit, which as a business lawyer, I think about a lot because, you know, we run on business, we run on commerce. So if you're going to ban plastics, you need to find something to replace plastics. And if you don't like plastics, you need technologies to mitigate the harm that plastics do. All that creates commerce. So I think there's two sides of that scale.
Well, on a team of committed environmentalists, what do lawyers add?
Um, I think again, and if I'm on the team, what I'm there to do is win. I think it's about winning. How am I going to win? What resources do I have to bring to the fight? What resources to the other side going to bring to the fight? And what is their counter strike going to be? If you're suing Exxon, you better duck because they're going to sue you right back. So I think about General Grant in the Civil War. He's trying to outflank Robert E. Lee in Southern Virginia. And he knows that he needs to get his troops across the mile and a half wide Rappahannock River, and he needs to get them across there before the enemy knows they're there. So he's got to bring his Corps of Engineers with him to bring a pontoon bridge. That's what I think about. I think about winning.
And bringing pontoon bridges.
If you need a pontoon bridge, you got to bring your own. It's not going
Okay.
to be.
Well, tonight we're talking with you about your legal work to further the development of recycling infrastructure. But you say in your interview that recycling is not actually the focus of your work, rather, the focus is the law. So it sounds like you've worked on behalf of a lot of recycling and environmental businesses, but I know you've done a wider range of legal work as well. So can you give us some idea of the breadth of the work you've done, even outside of recycling?
Well, that would be a long answer because I know a little about a lot of things and a lot about not very much. One of the
Mhm.
things I know quite a bit about is recycling, and I've been honored to represent recycling businesses. But at the same time, they haven't paid for the house that I live in or the car that I drive. I've had to branch out to find uh, some companies that had a little bit more of an economic wherewithal because recycling businesses unfortunately trail way behind the waste haulers, and I hope in my lifetime to see that reversed, but it hasn't happened. But for example, I've done paternity cases, I've done divorces, I've done criminal cases, I've done just about almost anything you could imagine. At some point in 44 years, I've done it.
And it sounds like mostly it's been with businesses, is that right? Like not governments or others like that?
Well, I've been general counsel to public agencies, which has given me a good perspective of how they work and the problems one has in navigating them. For a long time, I was general counsel to a large retail chain, which had 64 stores nationwide. So I learned how to do leases. I did all of their work. I did their HR work. You know, top to bottom, I was the legal department. So I I appreciate that I have this broad range of experience, and in my later years, I've dedicated to try to passing on some of the knowledge because I mentor a group of about 25 lawyers through the program with the Alameda County Bar Association. So people in the past have in my later life.
What is it that you especially like about law?
I think it's a superpower. That's what I like about it. It gives you the power to make a bad person do something they don't want to do. And Superman really can't say any more than that. And even he has trouble with Lex Luthor.
Hmm.
I'm looking to see if Sumona has joined us yet, and I don't see her. Okay, sorry.
Okay. Um, what about audience people? What questions do you have for John? Mary
John,
Lou.
could you talk about monopoly? And
Monopoly.
Yeah.
It's great if you can get one. If you're a competitor, if you're a competitor with a monopoly, it's a bad thing. And unfortunately, uh, local governments decided 30 some years ago that what they really liked to monopolize was garbage because it was a win-win. The garbage company would pay a franchise fee to the public agency that would go into the general fund, so there was really no limit on the spending. They would pass that franchise fee onto the ratepayers, so it was not the government paying the bill. And the garbage company was so grateful for that they would bring campaign contributions to the people that voted for the monopoly. So it was a great system. And I think that it's taken a while, but we're making some inroads against it. But it really has depressed the recycling infrastructure and the growth of recycling businesses. And I regret that I haven't been able to figure out how to win that one.
John, can I follow up
Sure.
with a question then? Okay, following up on the monopoly question, what's the effect of monopoly on the big problem that Democrats had this time around as they lost to a guy who's very favorable to monopolies? But they did it on the strength of votes from people that don't have college diplomas and a lot of times are not as well as informed as others, but are very upset with the way the economy has treated them and the position they find themselves in. So that, to me, comes back to monopoly, because what monopolies have done in garbage is to go for, they're not labor intensive at all. They don't like to be labor intensive. They want to get rid of labor. They want to do it with machinery if they can.
Well, that's a way too complicated question for me to answer. And if I knew the answer, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in right now, I think. But the definition of monopoly is it's a combination or conspiracy in restraint of trade, meaning you have to have multiple actors doing relatively evil things to suppress trade and commerce. I'm not quite sure how that happened in a democratically run election. I don't know I don't know if I can make a connection between the election and a monopoly. It used to be, the one definition used to be two people getting together whose last name ended in a vowel. And of course, my name ends in a vowel. So
I see, by the way, that Sumona has joined us, so I think we can switch over to your talking with her.
Thank you.
Could I talk about monopoly for a minute or two?
Oh, we're going to have to come back to that piece. I only have 10 minutes with Sumona.
Not a problem.
Thanks. Sumona, thank you for joining us. Sumona, for everybody, Sumona is formerly the General Counsel of Earth Island Institute Legal Counsel, which is a big deal. And today she's the CEO of Earth Island Institute, which is an even bigger deal. And I'm grateful that she's willing to spend 10 minutes with us tonight to talk about the value of being a lawyer when you're a zero waste warrior, which she is. So Sumona, as a zero waste warrior or an environmental warrior, what benefit has it been to you to have a law school education?
Well, thanks for having me on, and sorry for joining at the very last second. I was having some struggles logging in, but I feel like there's a number of different ways that I've benefited by being a lawyer. As all of you know, this is a highly regulated area, waste management and waste collection and how we define waste. And so I have a little lady here who's trying to mention. I need to feel okay. And so I've having a legal education has allowed me to really understand how to read regulations and navigate them and recognize, which things are covered, which are not. Where is there room for litigation? Where might we benefit from other kinds of advocacy strategies outside of litigation? I think another way that having a legal education has really benefited me is by being able to communicate clearly and also be able to manage communication through distractions. And I think lastly, my legal degree has really taught me how to digest a lot of information and present it in a concise and clear way, which is, I think often the challenge of getting people to understand why something is important, like zero waste or other areas of advocacy.
So to try to put that into practical terms, Earth Island is at the forefront of certain anti-plastic efforts. How has your law school skill helped you assemble the resources to take that on?
Yeah. One is like a really practical piece is just establishing a network. We wouldn't be able to do the work we're doing without having a lot of people who are willing to give their time essentially freely or at very low cost. And then other people who are, who you can turn to when you just need a thought partner on something, or might be able to give a little bit of an inside scoop of other lawsuits that, are serving as the foundation for what we're trying to do. Because there's always a lot in just building a lawsuit and knowing and understanding like the strategies that you might be able to pursue, and knowing, what really happened in other cases that tried to use those same strategies. And then I also, in my particular focus on the litigation that I really focused on at Earth Island was the anti-plastic lawsuits. I explored a lot of those theories while I was in law school. And so I made connections, in my current work to things that I had done some deep thinking on in law school, and had the time, It's funny because you think in law school you don't have that much time, but when you think back, you're like, wow, I actually had a lot of time to really think about different legal frameworks and how we might be able to apply them in different kinds of cases. And then, lastly is just really knowing how to put together a case. Although that piece, I think, is something you start to understand in law school, but really develop in practice once you're actively in litigation.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this on the show tonight was I do want to actively encourage people to think about a legal education, because it's just so much a part of zero waste advocacy. And so earlier in the show, I mentioned my own feeling that having a law degree and using it is kind of like having a superpower. Would you agree with that or not?
I think that's true. I mean, I think particularly because you can use your legal skills in so many settings. I do think, being a lawyer who's barred somewhere gives you access to represent clients and do a type of work that very few people are able to do, and to be able to do that on behalf of a cause that you believe in is really like a privilege. And so if going to law school matches your skills and is within your means, one way or another, it is. I agree. I think it's a huge benefit to the cause that we're trying to advance.
I'm going to just take 2 more minutes because I know that your time is, trying to be free from distractions. When you were plotting out the anti-plastic lawsuit and you're thinking about what's the counterstrike going to be, did you think that the counterstrike was going to be sue the state attorney general for defamation?
Oh, I definitely anticipated that. Yeah, we thought about that. About what insurance we would need to have in place. So yes, why I anticipated it is because I looked to the kinds of scorched earth tactics that the tobacco companies used, that oil and gas companies have used in other contexts. So I certainly expected that to come.
It's just you need to take the punch, right?
Yeah. And, it's intentionally it's a shot across the bow to try to silence further action.
And if you have a superpower, you have to withstand the kryptonite.
Yes. Well, and again, this is when you draw on that network that you've developed as well, right?
Well, Sumona, thanks so much for joining us today. I'd love to have you for, more time, but I know you've got distractions. So
yeah, sorry. I tried to have her listen to a podcast, but clearly didn't work. So
It worked.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Thanks.
So Lori.
Yes.
Turning to our other lawyer on the show tonight. Lori, you were part of the Save the Albatross Coalition, which
Yes.
by definition means that there's more than just you involved. How did you go from law school to the Save the Albatross Coalition?
I kind of say that I have been on a Gumpian path, but I know that luck is a measure of being in the right place at the right time and so on and so forth. So I used to work with the Sierra Club, that was other organizations before that, and being a docent for local harbor seals in La Jolla. And as part of that, we would do beach cleanups. I was also involved with I Love a Clean San Diego here in San Diego. Just, early on, I recognized that, throwing away Christmas trees was bad, just wasting things and the trash and so forth. So I got involved with them, Surfrider, cleaning up beaches. And I'm thinking there's got to be a better way. So on one of my encounters with cleaning up the beach to keep the environment and the nesting grounds clean for the harbor seals in La Jolla, I encountered a woman who had just finished a master's program at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and that was the master's in science, and it's in ocean conservation. And so anyway, it's a long name, but what I'm trying to say is that she encouraged me to go. And she was a journalist, and I said, can I do this as a lawyer? And basically it's to be able to communicate science from different perspectives in different professions. So I think that brought me to Zero Waste San Diego was having a symposium, and I met Captain Moore, Charles Moore there. And that's how I got involved with Save the Albatross and Ruth Abbey. So I just, I stumbled into meeting two incredible human beings that are, warriors in this field. And so I got involved with that. And now Zero Waste San Diego, I'm on their board as well.
Is there something about law and law school that helps you clean up messes? Because I have to tell you, when I was 5 or so years out of law school, my mother, who was a very demure little old lady, for Christmas gave me a broom. I said, Mom, I have a broom. Why did you give me a broom? She says, well, you're going to need it in your job.
I love it. Well, the thing about law is, it takes sometimes several years to clean up our messes. And the resolution of a dispute, a conflict, is what really I enjoy most in the law. But, when you go do a beach cleanup, you may not get it all, but at least if you're cleaning a section of a beach or a small beach, you can see results immediately. So that is fulfilling for me. But, recognizing the problem is so much bigger and more complex. And as lawyers too, we live in a world of gray and complexity, and it's not, always a straight line, a linear line. Sometimes I feel a bit like an earthworm. I was saying, like a blind worm. Just I go and I try something and I bump into a wall. So I switch directions and I bump into another wall. And I just keep going though, until I make sure that I've tried all the walls and all the places on the wall and there's no door that I can go through. Sometimes that's how it is. And I feel like that's kind of how it is sometimes with policy making and so forth. But I like that, you have a clear vision that you want to win, and you think of the quickest, I think, easiest way. And I probably would rather you share your theory of a lawsuit against big corporations or manufacturers of plastic with the flea biting and death by 1,000 flea bites, which I thought was very creative. And that's something that I know I admire you greatly, and Sumona too, for your strong minds and, being able to not only think like a lawyer, but the breadth of your knowledge and also creativity, thinking creatively. So that's very important as well, right? Whether you're, no matter what kind of advocacy you're doing.
Well, you're too kind, but because
Not at all.
Sumona talked about the need for networking, and here you're part of a coalition.
Yes.
Tell us about how law helps you to establish networks and coalitions and how those can work in your favor.
Well, first of all, just my title, I have to say, not knowing anything about me, they just bring me on these boards, I think, because I'm a lawyer. But, no, I have, you garner a level of respect because, you've walked the walk, you've done the schooling, you put in the time, and you have the experience and some knowledge. Of course, I've been lawyering for 34 years. It's hard to believe, but you learn a few things along the road. It's called the practice of law,
Right.
like the practice of medicine, which is scarier, but you learn, you make a mistake and you learn from it. but so that I've gained, being from San Diego, for example. I mean, the down here is 10,000 people, 10,000 attorneys, but I know most of them. I see a lot of them. It's been a while since I've gone to court. We've gone to, Zoom mostly for all appearances, but even on the screen, wherever I see and know a lot of lawyers. And now in the environmental field through school, Scripps, there are people that are now leaders of not-for-profits all over San Diego that went to school with me at Scripps, and then people, on the boards that I serve with and the organizations, and then of course bigger organizations like yours, and that are California based, California wide. And so when you go to these network events, it's like, like you collect good people that, it's not for me to collect, but just that, you get to know them and you have a mutual respect for one another. And I think, organically that just carries over to whatever endeavors you're doing, and it's helpful.
Well, you talked a little about prestige and respect, and I'm thinking if you were speaking to a crowd about the need to clean up plastics, if you were just Lori Mendez, would it be as effective as if you're Lori Mendez? I've been practicing law for 34 years.
Yeah, I've been practicing law and I went to Scripps to get a master's, both of those things, so I've got that behind me. But no, I agree. Just from my title alone, like I said, if you have the ESQ after it, people, I think they listen up a little bit better, or they really want to hear what I have to say. So it better be good. So yeah. Yeah, but one thing I want to say that struck me when you were talking about creativity. There's an organization called the Performing Animal Welfare Society, PAWS, and I'm very much an animal advocate as well, and I can talk about that another day. But one of the reasons that I'm interested in reducing plastics is, we're animals. We have to understand that. But animals that are out in the wild that have nothing to do with consumption of plastics are, of course, extremely adversely affected. Save the Albatross, for example. But interestingly, what they did to stop elephants from being in animal circuses, they tried, they couldn't ban circuses. But I really like this lesson. What they were successful in doing is showing show the City Council of Los Angeles how cruel bullhooks were on animals, on those elephants. And so they were able to ban the bullhooks. I think that went, California wide. And then I think that, it got banned altogether. So people realized what was going on and they heard about it. But I just thought that was so brilliant, the way they went about that. They couldn't ban the circuses, so they banned the use of the bullhooks. And of course, elephants couldn't be controlled without those. There's no other way. So anyway, I think like you have to think very creatively around the edges, whatever you can do, however you can, take a bite out of this and get plastics reduced. I think we have to do that.
Trying to say earlier was in terms of the nibbling around the edges part of the law. You're really nibbling around the edges until the policy becomes more clear. Like there's a lot of people who advocate for elephants nowadays that weren't there 50 years ago. And so it was partly that you can't use bill hooks, but it's also partly a lot of people thinking this just isn't right.
Yeah. And you got to get to that point. Right. Yeah. The bull hooks just aren't right. And, plastics poisoning us. And we're learning in LA. I mean, imagine people who have, we have solar panels on our roof and, but imagine people who also have plastic grass and plastic fences then, plus everything else that the house is made of, plastic components, and then what's in our garages and, bathrooms or whatever. I mean, times 10,000 and more, I'm sure. But anyway, just imagine what we're doing to ourselves. And at what point do we say, let's stop poisoning ourselves? I mean, that's really what we're doing. But I think the messaging also, one thing that everybody, if you haven't seen Chicago, you should see it. But The Ultimate Spin, the play, or with Richard Gere, the movie, it's how you spin it. And if you want to call it that, it can just be a matter of perspective, but, and you being true to that perspective. But it's also recognizing that sometimes, I can't be the expert in everything. There maybe needs a behavioral scientist to be involved to say what people can digest or what they're willing to hear and digest. I can't do everything, but at least recognizing who the experts are in the field, to help you accomplish the goal of winning,
And then sometimes you have to take advantage of catastrophe. Like, I would imagine the smoke from Los Angeles with all the toxic stuff that's in it blowing down to San Diego would be an incentive for San Diego to want to make some changes.
We haven't had it yet, but for the grace of whoever you believe in, the Sandhunters are still with us, and they're here this week and next week. I think there have been many fires in San Diego, but any day we could be experiencing the exact same thing. I think all of us in the southwest part of the United States, and especially those who are susceptible to the Santa Ana winds, are, we're just on pins and needles a little bit, I would say, and expecting that bad air to come down here, though it hasn't yet, any day. But so far we're outside enjoying life and being very grateful for that. But we're very vulnerable. I think this makes us realize that the catastrophe in Los Angeles makes us realize that we are so vulnerable, and the things that really matter are life, and without wildlife, without the trees, without our pets, and everything, and our fresh water, clean air, these are the things that really, really matter. And so I always think, I always said, when people ask me, about politics, I'll always answer, I'm for, clean air, clean water, clean soil, good education, and healthcare. What does that make me? Am I some sort of liberal progressive, or, what does that make me?
Yes.
Am I far left or right or anything? It makes me a human being, and it's a natural right. And, that's a little bit under the philosophy category, but.
You're a true conservative.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
then F would call you a conservative because you're trying to conserve.
Then that's it. Then that's what I am.
So because I'm trying to encourage people for law school education, I hate to bring up a negative, but you kind of triggered this for me.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about beach cleanup. You go to a beach, you kind of clean it up. You go home and you say, I cleaned up a beach today and it feels pretty good.
Yeah.
A ditch digger, he goes out, he digs a ditch, he comes home and says, I dig a ditch. Practice of law, and it is practice. Practice of law really is not that. You go home and you don't dig very many ditches. You don't clean up many beaches. How do you psychologically, how do you steel yourself to keep the fight going?
To keep the fight going? Because, I always say, first of all, with climate change and plastics, and there are so many things that are just ingrained systemically in the US and worldwide. We have seen changes, I think they talk about aerosol cans, this bullhook and little, there are changes from just, from COVID, post-COVID, there are things that have happened that I didn't think could change. But unfortunately, sometimes things have to get so bad before they can get better. But I always say, whether they change or not, I'm going to keep fighting, because I do have a grandchild, but even if I didn't, it were just my children. I want them to have the best life possible. But I think this world, our universe that we know, is worth saving. And I'm willing to fight till the very end for it. Again, even if it's futile, I'm willing to do what I can. Of course, I try not to work in vain and futilely. I know I try to educate myself about the best way, most effective ways that I can be of service, because we all only have so much time and energy. I have a lot of energy, but my time is waning with each passing year and decade and so forth. But I'm saying we try to educate ourselves to, for example, fight upstream battles more than at the beach. Though I still do beach cleanups when I'm called upon once in a while, and then I use that as an educating platform, really, if I'm there.
So if you had it to do over it again, would you go back to law school?
Oh, I think I would. I think it's who I was born to be. I don't know what else I would do. But I might have been an environmental attorney from the get-go instead of a civil like you. It pays the bills, a civil medical malpractice and PI attorney, personal injury. So, but still for me, we're fighting for justice. So it translates. And environmental and social justice are extremely important. And to me, 100% worth fighting and, I don't know, dying for, but I would rather die over those things than a lot of others. But so fortunately, I don't have to carry the fight that far, I don't think.
Maybe we could invent a new practice area. We'll call it political malpractice.
Oh, there you go. Now see, I like the way John thinks. I love the way you think. Really, I think that's a great idea.
Thanks for joining me tonight, Lori. I know other people have some questions for you, so I'm going to open it up for that. Mary Lou, you had a question?
Yeah, I do. Having you be an attorney and having you obviously dedicated to being an environmental attorney, social justice, this whole, shall we say, liberal direction. Although Dan and I say recycling is exactly where liberal and conservative meet. Nevertheless, before I worked at Urban Ore, I worked for Friends of the Earth, and I worked for Sierra Club, and I worked for the state of California in the Office of Appropriate Technology. And all those efforts were devoted to, let's keep our planet as livable as we can, please, and see if we can't leave our children and grandchildren something that's sustainable into the indefinite future. But I stopped being in that field in like 1981, 82. So it's been a minute. And I do remember I met a lot of environmental activists and a lot of people who were on campaigns. And boy, it's easy to get burned out because you put in a lot of energy, and you don't get nearly enough pay for it. And any attorney who works for a nonprofit doesn't get the same kind of pay. So I'm wondering, in that kind of circumstance, what keeps you going? I know that environmental activists routinely say, you're not going to win this campaign for 50 years. You need to find people who can carry it on from one decade to the next. So how do you reconcile that with your limited energy? You're only one person. What do you do?
Thank you for asking. First of all, I have what I call my regular practice outside of environmental law. So that is, again, civil litigation, but not environmental law cases. I have been trying, John knows, because we talk and correspond, and I have been trying to find the right case, like a truth in advertising case, a violation of truth in advertising, that I can bring to another attorney that I know, and I can be mentored by him, and I can shadow him and work alongside of him, maybe do some things and follow him and shadow him and learn how he handles this case. It will be a class action lawsuit. Well, I've been trying to marry the two. But in short, I spend, most of my day, but some days, most of my day doing my regular practice. Some days I spend most of my day doing environmental stuff, or a third of my day, or at night. So I carve out a part of the day to do environmental stuff, whether it be for the board, tasks, or, whatever it is that I'm doing. So I haven't really gotten into the trenches of litigation. One thing I've done, for example, I'll take some credit for the lawsuit that Sumona is still handling against, I think, Coca-Cola. I think that's still ongoing, and PepsiCo and Nestle. One of the creative things I did is I was driving up to Mammoth Lakes, and I happened to notice Crystal Geyser. We were looking for an in-state defendant to use. And I'm like, bingo, somebody for water bottles that we could sue. And I'm thinking always in that frame of mind. And I'm like, there it is. So I checked them out when I got home from, the Secretary of State site. And sure enough, they were, they were doing business here in California. So we had an in-state defendant, even if Coke and Pepsi and Nestle were not. So that was something. And I spoke about that and bringing a lawsuit against them finally in the, a few years back. And John was the one that said, yeah, this is going to take years and years. They're going to, they're not just going to settle and say, sure, we'll do what you want. They're going to fight. And that's the thing sometimes I have to say I enjoy the fight. If I don't fight anybody, we start out like this, and unless somebody escalates, I don't usually escalate first. That's just my style. But then if they escalate, I'm escalating. We're in it until the end. But the cases that I fight are like a year and a half or 2 years. These go on, and they take a lot of resources. But those people have teams, whether they're in a not-for-profit or not. So as far as the money, I get paid, separately, and I do taekwondo. So I do something legal where I can punch and kick and yell, several times a week, and illegally, and that it helps me seriously. Doing exercise and keeping that balance helps me. And so, also I am buoyed by people like yourselves. And with the knowledge and the integrity and, the things that we help each other, right? And you can be depressing, it's true, but we're all fighting the same fight, and there's solidarity and camaraderie. And I really enjoy that part of it. Like, I would like talking to John about, just bouncing ideas off him and him telling me what he thought, and many of you. And, I see Neil here that I know too. And you're amazing idea factories, and I hope sometimes I am too. But we all have our different experiences, perspective, knowledge that we've gained, and it's all important. Sometimes somebody might think of almost everything, but then somebody else can, just like can build upon that, or we build upon the knowledge and the wisdom of each other. And I think we're stronger for it with our alliances and our interpersonal connections. I think that's a big part of it. And so I hope I answered your question. It's pretty long-winded, I know.
No, it's good. It's good.
So
It sounds like you get a lot of energy from other people.
I do. I hope they do for me too.
we're all a coalition.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
questions, Danaya, did you have a question?
Hi, yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for organizing this event. My name is Danea. I'm here with Gaia, the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. We work at the intersection of waste and environmental justice, and I appreciate this topic as we are working to strategize and plan and prepare for the incoming administration. And my question, my question is, are there any, I'm sure there are many, but any like key or immediate legal tactics or strategies that you all would recommend for continuing to be able to advance our zero waste initiatives and just like combating all of and defending the wins that some folks spoke of tonight, in anticipation of a Trump administration and what that means and potential risks and threats to the zero waste movement? Interested in any like immediate legal tactics or strategies we should be thinking about and incorporating into our strategy, because that's where we're at, trying to figure that out. So I appreciate that.
Stock up on bear spray.
Yeah, Denai, I just want to thank you for the good work you're doing. And I think it's so critical because, like I said, we think of upstream and also, downstream solutions, and getting rid of incinerators is, I know they were recently successful here in California. I think all of them are finally gone, or going offline. So but, we all know that's not the answer, just like, all the way upstream's not the answer. We have to reduce all of that as soon as we can. But I'd like to hear from Attorney Moore, but I want to defer. But I think, people are working proactively and defensively already. All of the .orgs I think are huddling and thinking about what they can do, with Project 25, whatever. They have an idea of, Trump's playbook and what he says. It was hard for me to believe that wall would ever go up. And but anyway, true to his word, I don't doubt that he's going to try and do everything he says. And so we have to fight him, I guess, and proactively deter him and put up hurdles and use every strategy possible under the sun, without, like, what do they say? Like, if you fight with a skunk, you might end up smelling like one, because it's hard not to like stoop to the level where he is and do these horrible things, but it will be interesting. I myself personally haven't really given a lot of thought. You know, when I hear a news story, I'll think about that. But I don't have any solutions, anything to pull out of, you know, my hat right now. But I think the strategies, some have already been developed, you know, like the ACLU and environmental organizations are thinking about this right now already and bracing themselves. And, you know, California, I think, is trying to do things proactively. And I even like that Biden was trying to, you know, well, he issued executive orders where Trump said, I'm going to go ahead and frack here and, you know, drill here. And Biden, I think, made some national monuments, so he can't do that. But I mean, that's not going to solve all the problems. There's still going to be pristine places that I'm sure he's going to, you know, free up for oil drilling and so forth. But I think, you know, one thing I think we can do to fight again is like the transparency of it all and truth telling. I just think that's really, really important. So that if people know, like, shaping ideas, I guess, but through truth and transparency. Because I feel like, you know, it's not our job to be paternal or maternalistic in terms of telling people what they should do. But, you know, we can hope we make the right decisions, but at least getting the information out there about, you know, what the products are that are being fed to us and how they are detrimental to our planet and our health and our life systems. And I think those are very important messages. And then, you know, at some point, I think also a message needs to be that government can't solve all our problems, that we need to be responsible, but not like for example, bottle companies will tell us, like, you need to take care of your own litter kind of thing. But we need to be responsible for, I guess, joining the right fight and fighting the right battles and, you know, doing all we can do, you know, in our own neighborhoods and communities. So I guess my answer to you would be, and I have thought about how we have to do things locally. Denaya, I think we need to, you know, maybe on the national level, I don't really know what we can do. It's pretty, to me, dark and dim, though there are still good people fighting on that level. But and maybe all we can do is eat away at the corners there. But I feel like locally is our best shot at making a difference. And so if you can get, you know, 100 communities in California to, for example, to do the right things, you know, you're winning to, you know, you're making progress, put it that way, forward progress.
I don't think I can really improve on that answer. Thanks, Lori.
Yeah.
I read that the state of California has invested a fair amount of money in the Attorney General's office to look at exactly the question that you asked, Anea. I have a feeling that we are likely to be more successful with the things that solely impact California and less successful on the things that are going on in Pennsylvania, for example. The dark and dim part that I feel is that our judicial system has been undermined, and I don't have a good solution for that. I have no idea what's coming next week. I'm not looking forward to next week. But I agree with Lori. We'll have to unite around something and be transparent and truthful. Does anyone else have a question for Lori? Dan, did you have a question?
Yeah, well, I wanted to just point out that there is a solution that doesn't do everything by any means, but does do a lot. And it's something that the Democrats in particular could turn into a battle cry and a thing that they want to do. And that is to get a little more focused in the infrastructure side of things that Biden has done so much with. He did a tremendous amount of rebuilding of our economic structure by focusing on infrastructure repair. Now we need another kind of infrastructure repair, That is that every community in the whole United States and all over European style countries, there are facilities that were built, infrastructure that was built in the 30s when recycling was just really getting off the ground. And now those facilities need rebuilding. They shouldn't be rebuilding on the old model. They should be rebuilding on the model of a 12 category zero waste resource recovery park. We have designs for those. Urban Ore is part of that. We're a living example, so is Berkeley. There are other examples all over the United States of how this is actually working. And what it does, among other things, is especially if you go anti-monopoly and you go anti-knee-jerk automation, what you end up with is a whole lot of small businesses that are local and that are dealing with things where they are and are creating wealth where they are. And you're also creating jobs where the people are that need them. And the jobs are really interesting, and they're a mixture of intellectual challenge and physical challenge as well, because labor intensive really is labor intensive. And when you're doing labor intensive anything, like for example, running a reuse business like Urban Ore, you're involved in moving things around. Sometimes a ton, sometimes 2-3 tons a day go through your hands. So
Did you have a question
anyway,
for Lori?
that's it. I'm done.
Did you have a question for Lori, Dan?
Well, only one last thing is Neil Seldman and I, and Neil's on this call. We have an article that we're putting out in various media, including Green Yes Lister, and it's called The Canary in the Coal Mine, and it's a whole long thing about what we can be doing about infrastructure repair through recycling, reuse, and composting.
Well, with that, I'm going to thank Lori again for joining us tonight and talking about law. I always love to talk about law and legal things, so it's a nice forum to do that. But thank you. I think we're going to segue into our Recycling Archive segment, which I understand is about me. So
Thank you all for having me. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Lori.
Oops.
Susan?
Yep. Okay. Well, so I have taken John's interview and want to read you some sections out of it that I thought were particularly effective and moving. So, for all of you who know John, you won't be surprised to learn that he started out stellar from the very earliest ages. And this is how he describes it. My parents assumed I would become a doctor. I really thought I would. I read medical texts for enjoyment when I was 10. I used a microscope to peer at dead tuberculosis and anthrax bacteria on slides that a family member had brought home from medical school. In 6th grade, I did a project on blood typing. Most of my class members submitted willingly to having their finger pricked with a needle, so I could squeeze their blood onto a slide and apply the 2 fluids that would reveal their blood type. I breezed through high school chemistry, physiology, trigonometry, but then being a pre-med student at UC Berkeley was a different animal entirely. I had no feel for physics or calculus. Low grades in those classes meant no med school. Well, I had the epiphany that I guess I was in the wrong field, but if not medicine, what was the right field? Now, on the side, I also became the news director of the Cal Recycling radio station, which had been off the air for years. And I and a core of others got it a new transmitter and an FCC broadcast license. I was news director for 2 years with an all-volunteer staff of 60, putting on 3 broadcasts every day. Former Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter once observed that most law students go there by default. That was me, with CBS TV and radio not begging me with job offers, and undergraduate life ending, I applied to law school. And in one of the two great pieces of luck I've had in life, the other, he says, fortunately, is his wife, I found out after being accepted late in the enrollment process that I actually enjoyed legal analysis and its puzzle-solving methods. Well, there's so much depth in John's interview that it's hard to choose just a few glimpses at what it holds. But I will say that one of the things I most appreciated about his interview is the broad philosophical thinking that he applies to his legal career. And he goes on to say, thinking like a lawyer means 1. Identifying the client's problem. 2. Discerning and applying the different laws that may apply to the problem. 3. Consideration of the non-legal aspects that might affect solving the problem. 4. Having the judgment to apply the right tools to solve the problem. And then 5. Using those tools to persuade someone to do what you want them to do. And as he said earlier in this recording, I came to believe that thinking like a lawyer was like having a superpower. I lucked into a law clerk job with one of the best lawyers in San Francisco, who's now a judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. He was a tough boss, but I learned from him how to be a good lawyer. And I mean 3 things by the term good lawyer. First, most young lawyers are given little exposure to the actual client and therefore have no real affinity for the client's problem. They treat clients as names on paper whose importance is the hours of time that can be used to satisfy their firm's billing needs. But my boss gave me lots of responsibility in client contact. I learned to be the best prepared lawyer in the case, no matter how much time it took, even if I couldn't bill for it. And second, I learned that I always owed clients care about solving their problems. And then third, I learned that no matter how complicated a situation seemed, there was always a silver thread of truth to be found that led to winning the case. I won my first case before I ever passed the bar. I started my own law firm at age 27 and have been self-employed since then. Almost 40 years later, I must admit, I'm still a little unsure if this was a wise idea. But after a few years, I became counsel for Urban Orr. And there I finally began to see the value, wisdom, and excitement of recycling. Even so, recycling never became my main occupation.
Oh, I thought I was returning your call. Okay. Well, I just finished the
Neil,
revision
could you mute
of
yourself?
the draft.
There you go.
All right. So John says, even so, recycling never became my main occupation. My career was always law. So in his interview, John describes several cases that he handled in considerable detail. Those make fascinating reading, but what I most valued was what he learned from each of these cases. He wasn't directly involved in recycling's landmark Rancho Mirage case, but he did file an amicus brief as friend of the court when the California Supreme Court heard the case in 1993. This case tried to sort out what was called flow control, meaning, according to my understanding, did the local governments have the right to direct the allocation of post-consumer discarded materials, or did this belong to the large waste haulers who had the collection monopolies? Here's John describing the outcome. With help from Urban Orr and considerable editing from Mary Lou Van Devender, our amicus brief text argued that nothing was waste until methods of resource recovery were first attempted and had failed. By that test, nothing was waste until it was wasted. Under this bright line test, waste was something that was landfilled or burned. Unfortunately, the state Supreme Court found a way around our definition by creating its own muddled definition of which materials could be franchised by local government. Intentional or not, their decision favored wasting industries over superior alternative resource recovery businesses that were already competing successfully for market share against heavy odds. I say the court legislated this decision because the statutes already defined what waste was, and the court failed to follow its own precedent for how to go about interpreting a statute. Basically, the court ruled that if somebody pays a disposal fee, then the material disposed is waste. They didn't see the kicker, that while the court recognized recyclables, Still, for the purposes of regulation, they said they were handling wastes because the waste hauler was paid a disposal fee. Thus, the recycling businesses were exposing themselves to crippling interference. And that's why I believed at the time that the court's fee-for-service test, meaning if somebody pays a disposal fee, then the material disposed is waste, was going to tilt the disposal markets toward monopoly ownership of collection, processing, and sale of recyclables. I think I was right. Afterwards, I was approached by many fee-for-service recyclers who faced headwinds by creating business models where resources were recovered to the maximum extent, but they had to be able to also charge a service fee for disposal to be economically sustainable. But the Supreme Court blocked them from doing that. They are up against government agencies and entrenched waste haulers who had far superior resources to bring to the fight. But John goes on to say, there were also deeply rewarding aspects to his legal work in recycling. As he says, I got my start in recycling. I was lucky to meet Dan Knapp and Mary Lou Van Devender. I have enjoyed a close relationship with them for over 30 years. I consider them mentors. Many things I heard them say that I thought were novel and interesting when I first heard them have, over the course of time, proved true. The recycling message that most interests me today is one I heard Dr. Knapp first say 30 years ago, that recyclers and waste handlers are competing for the same materials, and that recovery needs a level playing field to compete fairly with wasting. Waste haulers have the resources to hire the most clever advocates and lobbyists. Together, they've found ways to infiltrate and influence many recycling advocacy groups in ways that promote waste handling and not resource recovery. John says he came to realize that the heart of recycling controversies is that it is all political. He says, I think the primary concern of most elected officials is to stay in their government job, not to do the job they are hired to do. I think the state legislature acted smartly in 1989 when it passed landmark AB 939, mandating landfill diversion by requiring local governments to do the hard work or face large fines. This so-called unfunded mandate, telling them what to do without paying them to do it, was resented by local governments who grudgingly adopted programs to comply. But most local governments did not prioritize innovations that might have achieved the state diversion mandate via full development of resource recovery infrastructure. Government employees tasked with mandated compliance generally lacked business knowledge. And to them, the idea of betting on a small business model of resource recovery development sounded foreign, difficult, and time-consuming, all big deterrents. Meanwhile, local governments already had handy allies and the large waste collection businesses ready and willing to make government employees and elected officials' lives much easier. These corporate giants rushed to take on the obligation to perform the unfunded mandate. They even signed contracts, vowing to indemnify local governments against prospective state fines. To cap it off, they paid franchise fees into the local government general funds and paid campaign contributions to the elected officials who supported them. I mean, talk about a win-win. Waste haulers have always been clear in their intent. They want all the discards, and they want government to pay them for disposal however they choose to do it. Without local government support of recycling infrastructure, recycling companies have almost no chance to succeed. The recycling companies I've represented, who local governments helped put out of business by waste hauler-backed actions, all diverted more than their waste hauler or government competitors. And they did it with innovative business models and the work of well-paid employees. But they couldn't afford to play the local political game or spend the time to succeed at politics. So it is a competition for discards between recyclers and waste haulers, and the playing field is still steeply tipped to favor wasting. Okay, so now at this point, you might be asking, is there any good news here? And John says, to overcome this barrier, elected officials should consider transferring more power and responsibility over recycling to their economic development departments. These professional managers understand and empathize with specialist small business entrepreneurial development. They often have superior access to funding sources and to city and county councils. Instead, it's easier for government employees to administer a one-stop exclusive system. So what we have is economic regulation, not regulation to benefit community health and the environment. Small business operators are squeezed out. This regulatory tilt is promoted by big franchised waste haulers who have mastered the regulatory scheme and the political processes using profits from their exclusive contracts. Now, there have been other ways that John has tried to benefit his recycling business clients as well. One involved seeing the underside of politics far too up close. John says, as I became active on flow control issues in the 1990s, I had to dip my toe into political waters. After I had early successes, oh boy, the empire fought back. A public hearing was called in Pleasanton on granting an exclusive contract. A prospective client called the day before, asking if I could speak for them. I assembled a credible squad of recycling advocates to speak. I coordinated these speakers into a coherent sequence of testimonials, much as I would do trying a lawsuit. We did a terrific presentation, and then we lost the vote 4-1. I learned this lesson about local politics. You can't win by starting the day before the public hearing. All the government folks in the room knew the foregone outcome. They listened to us only because they had to. A former Sonoma County supervisor once told me that facing elected officials at a public hearing is like facing a group of smiling iguanas. To work politics at the local level, you have to engage with the elected officials and staff long before a public hearing is even scheduled. This is a big barrier to market entry for recyclers needing government permissions. Well, John goes on to describe several more political skullduggery options being used, but he also describes what he considers his biggest success, helping Urban Ore found its eco-park and purchase the property where it currently resides. John says, one of my specialties is negotiating, especially in a mediation environment. In 1999, Urban Ore sat on most of a city block between 4 streets, consisting of 2 different properties with different lease provisions. The owner of one of the properties notified Urban Ore that they had to vacate her portion of the premises because she wanted to sell it. She rejected all of our proposals. The problem wasn't only how to move all the doors and toilets off the property, it was where in the world they could be moved and keep the business alive. So we assembled a team that included a government affairs guru, an architect, a realtor, and a finance guy. And then we learned that the family owning the land formerly occupied by Pacific Pipe Company at 9th and Ashby was making it available to lease. I was tasked with negotiating a lease. I met with the family members, and we needed to negotiate for rent Urban Ore could afford, as well as for upgrades to bring the buildings on the property to code and for a professional environmental review of the site. We needed the city to change the zoning, and we wanted a long-term lease. And in the end, we got all these concessions and more. Now, there were a lot of convoluted steps and give and takes involved, and they make for fascinating reading. They also make it clear to me that being a lawyer isn't only about taking cases to trial. Much of it is actually about coming up with solutions that sometimes may be unique and untried, and then having to help all the participants do the horse trading necessary to turn them into win-wins. Maybe at the end there's legal work such as, writing a contract or something, but it was negotiation that really won the day. Now, I want to finish up by shifting the atmosphere here to something a bit more meditational. Imagine that there might be some soft Native American panpipes playing in the background as John tells us a very short story about a hike in New Mexico. It is an hour before sundown in New Mexico. My wife Kathy and I are staying at a famous spa in the mountainous north. We embark on a 1.5-mile hike to see the ruins of a Native American pueblo on adjacent land, which is believed to have held over 2,000 rooms about 800 years ago. The trail is well marked at the beginning. We climb up a rocky path about 200 feet and then down into a rocky valley and then up another ridge and then down again. And by now it is full dusk. Of the two of us, I own the only sense of direction, but my eyesight is poor. I can no longer see the spot where we began the hike. We press forward. But it's July, which is the monsoon season. As we stand on the ridge, the sky is covered black with thunderclouds. There's some light from a moon behind the clouds, but we didn't bring flashlights. We know that cells in the monsoon can unleash torrential rain and magnificent lightning without warning, and we are the tallest bodies on the ridge, save for a handful of manzanita bushes. But the pull of the ruins leads us further along a twisty, narrow dirt trail. And after a while, we come to some colored pottery shards, middens, that are just off the trail. You could reach down and pick them up if you wanted. We don't. A few feet further along the trail is another midden, and then another. And we realize we are now in the middle of an 800-year-old pueblo, looking at the waste of a people who disappeared from the area to parts still unknown today. It could not have been easy to make pottery 800 years ago. By the time the clay is purified and then shaped, heated to glaze, then painted with pigments that needed to be gathered, all this to make vessels from which the people could eat and drink, there's as much human investment in the end product as anything we buy today. The Pueblo people must not have had the infrastructure to recover broken pottery, or they didn't want to spend the time and effort. They packed up and left the Pueblo without cleaning up. Looking at these discarded shards on a night when the ionized air is perfectly still, we felt the spirit of these people whom time has forgotten, and we wondered, what will future explorers think of our middens of wasted stuff? We finally realized the folly of hiking at night in a strange place in the middle of a thunderstorm when we can no longer see from where we came. And we turn around and go back, but that question is still there. Thank you, John.
Thank you for the beautiful reading.
Thank you. I do have a few questions for you if you're up for it.
Sure.
One,
Don't ask me about the election now.
no, we might go beyond that.
Okay.
You talk about how the deck is stacked so far in favor of waste companies that it's almost falling over, and that there's far too little support for the development of resource recovery businesses. If you could magically recast the situation to be a level playing field, what do you imagine that might look like? This is an easy question, right?
I would recast the state Supreme Court's definition of waste. I would, if it was switched to what we had advocated, that stuff that goes to the landfill and is burned is waste and everything else is not. We would have flipped we would have flipped what government had to do. And by doing that, we would have recast and even the playing field, I think.
Okay.
It was that one bad court decision. And, like bad court decisions have a long life. The famous or infamous Plessy versus Ferguson case, from which found that, separate but equal satisfied the equal protection requirements of the 14th Amendment, was decided in 1880, and it didn't get overturned until 1953. So Supreme Court decisions, bad ones, last a long time. And like with a lot of the things we're talking about, the nibbling around the edges, I hope that within my lifetime that changes here.
Statewide initiative to repeal that definition.
It actually, you don't have to repeal it. You just have to pass an amendment to the Constitution saying that waste is not commerce. And then
you have to change the statute, and
local laws pertain.
That would be the simple solution. But so far, our state legislature is pretty beholden to the waste haulers and unlikely to do that.
Well, here's another one. Many of the stories in your interview appear to have occurred like couple of decades ago, and
Yeah.
those laid much of the foundation for the subsequent shape of the recycling landscape in the United States. But there's also been huge changes since then, such as China shutting the door to taking something like 40% of our collected materials and instead forcing the United States to actually have to take responsibility for our own wasteful ways. From my point of view, I think we lost a lot of momentum for recycling, along with many of the manufacturers who'd been successfully using recycled materials to actually complete the recycling cycle by turning them into new products. But then all of the materials started getting sent off to China, and a whole lot of the companies closed or they stopped recycling. But part of the purpose of these ZWAC shows is to explore what new environmental ventures younger generations are developing. So now my question is, what do you see for the future of recycling?
I see the economically motivated course corrections. I see that the California politicians wanting to pretend they're recycling by shipping plastic to China, and China finally exercising its economic will to say, we don't want it anymore. That's an economic course correction. I think that we're more and more finding that a lot of things that are, not being recycled or that are entering the environment are bad. And there's more publicity about those things. And as those things become more well known, we're going to find that there are economic drivers for people to find mitigation technologies, like the folks that are trying to figure out if mushrooms can eat plastic. That's where we're going to see the economics driving the changes, I think. If people can make money by eating plastic, they will.
Okay, thank you.
I'm less sanguine about that, John. Let's say that some young scientist comes up with a magic wand that eliminates plastic. You get a bunch of plastic and you wave your wand and it disappears.
Right.
That will not solve the problem. The problem is the production of plastic at every phase of production and distribution. It's a poison, and it's a poison. It's a double-edged poison. It's a poison literally to nature and the human body, but it's also a poison to the political economy, because the elected officials that we are railing against, the Trumpers and even the non-Trumpers who are denying climate change, they are all supported by floods of money from the oil and gas industry, which literally poisons our democracy. So finding a mass solution for plastic waste will not restructure the economy and the politics that will sustain a survivable world.
Well, I agree with you that it's only half of the problem to deal with the waste, the plastic waste, and having something that waves the magic wand or eats the plastic is only part of the solution. I think that the more people realize how poisonous plastic is and how the oil and gas industry is making, unconscionable profits off of it, people are going to want alternative materials, more or different than they have right now. And that in turn is going to make an economic driver to develop, environmentally sustainable and economically beneficial, alternative products. That may be too much of a wish list, but I realize your point is right, that you can't just deal with half of the problem.
Well, I agree, and I continue to have this battle. We all do, with these EPR people, extended producer responsibility, because they want to manage plastic, and they refuse to the obvious thing, tax plastic, make it more expensive to make a plastic bottle by putting a tax on it. And in this particular issue, the mainstream environmental communities that I read about and talk to are really part of the problem because they're looking for EPR to manage plastics, and plastics cannot be managed in a sustainable world.
But remember, we're nibbling, Neil. 20 years ago, we thought it was impossible to ban plastic bags in grocery stores. We thought it was impossible to get rid of microplastics in toothpaste. We thought, it was DuPont's God-given right to make PFAS and sell them. So things change. I'm not going to argue with you about the EPR, but things change and things have changed. Mary Lou?
I think Mary Lou, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that for EPR, which, as you know, I have fought and will still continue to fight, I think one of the strategies that will help us the most when we're working with Sierra Club and the conventional environmental community is to help them understand that when EPR works the way it's purportedly designed, whether it's taxed or not, you're giving the material back to the people who created the problem. And they have no incentive to actually fix the problem, and nobody has oversight because you're sending the material into a private handling structure where they're going to do whatever is cheapest. And it's going to be something bad. They're going to ship it off to Africa. They're going to ship it in Puerto Rico. The Puerto Rico government wants to put incinerators in a ring around the island and burn everybody's trash. Well, they'll send it to Puerto Rico and burn it. Well, the conventional environmental community is not going to be very happy with that kind of thing. And if you can just persuade them that you're giving the problem back to the people who created it, and they will do whatever is cheapest, and you won't be able to see what they do. They don't have to tell you. Under most rules of EPR, they don't have to tell you or show you or report to you in any way. So if you just say, you're giving it to them to hide, they will think about it a different way, I think.
Well, I can't really debate you because I'm pretty clearly on record saying that I don't think EPR as it's formed can ever work because it's essentially like those people in Game of Thrones trying to regulate the dragons. You can't really regulate the dragons. You don't have the power to do it.
And Mary Lou, I agree, John. And although I
don't know Game of Thrones, it sounds.
I haven't watched that show, so I guess I shouldn't comment on it. But to comment on Mary Lou, I don't think they're motivated by finding the cheapest solution. I think they're motivated by finding the solution that keeps them in power. So there are a lot of inefficiencies in corporate America, specifically because inefficiency keeps them in control of the legislature, etc. The classic line is when you say that Pepsi-Cola or Coca-Cola doesn't pay taxes, they say, well, we obey the law, but the comeback is that they write the law, and that's the problem. If in fact you abdicate and let the corporations run these EPR programs, and
the EPR programs are designed to be, the whole structure is the corporations run the EPR programs, and that is an abdication of citizens' responsibility. Yeah.
So does anybody want to ask another law question before I adjourn?
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think I've gotten my questions in.
Great. So I'm going to adjourn the show tonight. The reason I'm glad that Susan talked about our journey to New Mexico is because next month on the ZWAC Show, I will be interviewing a professor from Tulane University about how ancient peoples recycled or not.
Wonderful.
So I will see you every second Tuesday of every month. We have the ZWAC Show, something interesting that's new, and next month it'll something interesting that's old. So look forward to seeing you all then, and I will adjourn.
Thank you. Good to see you all.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much. Neil, so good to see you.
Being here.
Take care.